Hello and welcome back to another edition of ESPN Scrum Reset. It's Sam Bruce, joined as ever by Christy Doran. And Christy, special guest for the first time in the studio today in the Schmidt House. It's a big welcome to Super Rugby Pacific Chief Executive Officer, Jack Mesley.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here.
Great to have you here, Jack. I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable between the two shoulders of the respective individuals. I'm packing down in the middle.
Mate, I didn't take you for a hooker. I don't know that we'd get you in there these days either, particularly with those shoulders. As you mentioned, Jack, mate, we'll get straight into it. This season is absolutely off to a flyer. You started the job in July last year, so a bit over, 9 months into the role. Mate, this is easy work, this Super Rugby, eh?
Yeah, well, the rugby gods have certainly been kind in the first season. But, a lot of work's got in over the last couple of years on the laws of the game, and then a lot of the work we've done pre-season about just the refinement of those laws, and then, also how the match officials are really moving the game on, I think has helped. Yeah.
Did you sense this coming, this start, Jack? I mean, obviously you're hopeful that you get lots of running rugby, competitive matches, lots of points on the board. Did you have that confidence that would be the case early in the season off the back of that, or was just sort of a little bit of nervousness as well?
I think one of the things that attracted me to the role was this is a great product. And I always firm believer that with the right sort of focus on core product, and then how we kind of take that core product to a broader audience, there's massive headroom. Did I think we were going to get the sort of jeopardy that we've got early on? No. But the trend lines have kind of been there, particularly around our shape of game metrics, heading in the right direction since probably when it was not great, maybe 2022. So those trend lines have been ongoing. And last year we saw some really good sort of commercial trend lines in terms of crowds and audiences. So, yeah, I definitely knew the momentum was there. But, yeah, I think to have such great results after 5 rounds has been good.
Before we get into some of the bigger questions and some of the issues, hit us with some stats, because we talk about the fact that it's the most competitive season for a long, long time. What do the stats tell you?
Yeah, I think the stats tell us that we've got a really great mix between that close matches. So I think it's 9.6 points, the average margin. 44% of games have been 4 points or less. So that concentration of close matches, combined with high point scoring, the best season ever of Super Rugby Pacific after 5 rounds, with an average of 62.4 points per match. And then run meters. I think we're in the top 3 or 4 seasons ever for run meters after 5 rounds. So I think the combination of lots of tries, great style of play with run meters being really high, and then really close margin is giving us a great combination, which is driving those results.
What are you seeing engagement-wise from television commercial, Jack? Because we know that's just as important as what's happening on the field. What do you sense you're getting from Stan and Sky Sport in particular around what they're seeing?
Yeah, they're having a great season. So Sky put out some data, I think, last week at the conclusion of round 4 that they were up about 12.5% for the same period last year. Stan also up over double digit. I think they were 17, if my memory serves correctly. And then also in Fiji, the numbers are off the charts. They're up about 40%. And so they just keep breaking records week after week. So last week, they put out a number that was about, I think, 396,000 people on the Wesley app, which is, in terms of percentage of population, just phenomenal.
That's incredible.
So TV's great. All of our social metrics are off the charts as well. And crowds we're seeing, but crowds take time. But we're definitely up this previous period last year, which is good. And then things like some of the new initiatives like fantasy, we're really pleased with those sort of numbers as well.
A great initiative, fantasy. I think particularly that's tapping into your younger audiences, which is what you...
I'm even back playing again.
Yeah, welcome back. Well, at the moment, Rugby Australia, New Zealand Rugby are pretty close to finalising broadcast deals. Do you wish, and I know that you're not necessarily going to get the money there yourselves, but you help each other, right? Do you wish that these negotiations could be 6 months further down the track so that the momentum could continue to add and maybe more money from the broadcast partners injecting into the game?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly helpful as the contracts are being finalised to have this continued momentum. But I think, your point's a really good one. We need to make sure that we have sort of compound growth so as that we're we're entering the next discussions, that we have a great body of work in which we can take to market and really get a great deal for the code, and for Super Rugby Pacific and all of our clubs. So yeah, I would love to have sort of 5 years of consecutive growth, to initiate those discussions, and that's what we're focused on now. You know, turning Super Rugby Pacific commercial entity around is a long-term game, and you do need that consecutive growth, year on year on year, to get those long lead time revenue sources going in the right direction.
I think it's fascinating at the moment. We're seeing, and of course it's a British and Irish Lions series later this year, and that doesn't directly impact Super Rugby, but we can see right across the news landscape, partners coming back a bit more. News Corp finally starting to cover Super Rugby properly. And I was previously at News Corp, and for a couple of years, there was not necessarily a direct message out there, but an indirect one that we're not covering it. It's not our product. We're not going to do it. But the fact that Jamie Pandaram, the Daily Telegraph, Code Sports is up covering the Queensland Reds in Brisbane on a Saturday night is a great step in the direction of the continued momentum that we're talking about.
Jack, for those people who may not know a lot about you, why did this role appeal to you? It's unique, first of its kind in the history of Super Rugby. We previously had kind of Sanzar, and, you know, Christy and I have been critical of Sanzar over the years for a number of reasons, but it always felt that this role needed to exist. Why did you jump at the opportunity to take it?
Yeah, well, firstly, rugby's my primary sport that I played, and I loved. And I worked for the RA back in 2003 World Cup. So I've always loved rugby. Having spent a bit of time with some other sports, you know, I've worked in golf, I've worked in rugby league, I've worked in A-Leagues, which is my role most recently. Yeah, the opportunity to come in, get an ecosystem together around what I've always believed is a great product, and give it some direction to head forward. Just it seemed like such a good opportunity for me, with my skill set and my experience, but also, you know, everyone wanted more focus. So I wasn't going into an ecosystem where people were arguing about, do we need this role and is this structure right? The conversation was, everyone in the ecosystem wants a new board with some new management to bring the team together. And so in that way, it was an easy sell. You know, this role has been required for a long time, and I knew that for the first probably 18 months of the role, there was going to be just a lot of momentum that we can kind of harness and move forward.
Do you find it frustrating that you look at the NRL and AFL, the heads of their respective bodies are almost the all-encompassing figures? That's not necessarily the case in rugby. So with Rugby Australia and New Zealand Rugby, Mark Robertson, Phil Waugh, their respective boards being so active in what they can do, and World Rugby over the top of that, what can you actually do in terms of meaningful change across the competition?
Yeah, I mean, I think you look at NRL, AFL, and those leagues are the pinnacle of the game. And so from a league point of view, yeah, we can look at those comparisons and go, oh, you know, it's difficult, but we're also an international game. So how lucky are we that we have World Cups, we have the Wallabies, the All Blacks, we have international rugby. And so we're really clear about what our role is in that pyramid, and we're in the middle of it. And my role is to make Robbo's role, Mark Robinson's role, and Phil Waugh's role a hell of a lot easier by having a single-minded focus on growing this competition. And so if I can do that, they can focus on grassroots, focus on Wallabies and All Blacks, and be a safe pair of hands to drive this competition forward. So yes, we are limited in terms of some of the things that, you know, that NRL and AFL can do, but we're also blessed in a way that we've got something that is bigger than any of those competitions in international rugby. But to your question, what can we do as the board of Super Rugby Pacific and as the management of it? There's really clear governance structures that are in play. We have some material matters that are reserved matters for NZR board and RA board, which largely anything to do with that intersect between our competition and Wallaby success or All Black success. So our teams are still licensed to NZR and RA, but anything around eligibility, number of teams, those material matters are still for those boards. But for our board, it's all about, we've got a really clear focus on our product, on our marketing and communications, driving those commercial results.
If I can jump in here, over the weekend, we saw the Western Force go across the ditch, the Crusaders, and before that, I think there was quite a few people that were surprised that Simon Cron rests a number of players of national interest. So Carlo Gisano, Ben Donaldson, Nick White, there might be another one in there, coupled with a couple of injuries that they copped as well with Dylan Peach and Nick Champion to Crepney. What do you think of that when a side goes across the ditch? And they stuck with the Crusaders for quite a while, but I don't think anyone thought that they were going to win that game, given that their depth was so totally depleted by the fact that they stood players down.
Yeah, I think player management and load management is going to become more and more of a focus for us. And yes, because our Wallabies and our All Blacks play more games, that load management is more acute than someone that's not playing national teams. But in any contact sport going forward, that load management is going to become a bigger piece of the puzzle. I think it introduces a whole strategic level to coaches in terms of which game you are resting who, that we need to be talking about. And we also know that a whole lot of fan interest is about the emerging player in Super Rugby Pacific. And so, in some of the fan surveys we've done, the drivers of engagement with Super Rugby, you have, watching the international players, but not far behind is working out, seeing that next player, right? Who is going to be the next Wallaby, the next All Black? So the resting of players is a thing that we're going to have to deal with, but I think it's really strategic. And so Simon's decided that this is a game that he's going to rest some players. Steve Larkham did it for the Drua match up in Fiji for, I think, round one. He rolled the dice and got away with it. I think that's an added level of interest in the competition. It'd be great if all players could play all of the time, but that's not the reality in the world that we're living in. So how do we take that strategy and run with it and follow those storylines that come from it?
Now, the Waratahs had a pretty ordinary defeat on the weekend. The cynics out there would suggest that they were handed a very soft draw to start the season. Can you just explain what goes in to creating the draw, setting it up, what factors kind of have to be considered? Because a lot of people look at that and go, well, New South Wales, here you go, golden ticket.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into a fixture. There are some hard constraints that we have to go in right at the top. So things like travel rules, days rest, which, back-to-back games, tours to New Zealand, etc. When you play each other, how we space by. So they're all hard constraints that go in, that are sort of rules, if you like. And then we've got some strategic decisions to make that then go in as sort of second-tier constraints. So with an uneven number of teams, and also then, we don't have a long enough season to play everyone to play home and away. We've got to decide things like, well, who will you play a second time and who won't you play a second time? And then in terms of the phasing of the draw, do we want to front load it with Australian derbies and New Zealand derbies? They're decisions we've got to make. Time of year, the competitive contexts are all important with that. And there's no doubt that for us in late February, early March, we've got to hit the ground running. We've got some clean air there. So playing more derbies, Australian teams versus each other, New Zealand teams versus each other, that is important, and that is a strategic choice that we're trying to make. We do have to balance that because we don't have it all our own way. Venue availability is one of our biggest constraints. So whilst you'd love a clean set of paper that goes, okay, we'll shuffle it around this way and we'll drive commercial returns here and rugby returns there and add some jeopardy by, maybe loading the dice on some teams. Unfortunately, with venue availability, you get a little hamstrung on being able to play as much as you would like to.
There was also an embarrassing situation for the Drua when they travelled to play the Hurricanes a few weeks ago. Bus not there for them at the airport, double booked kind of accommodation set up. And what have you since learned about that situation and how can that be avoided from your perspective in the future?
Yeah, it was a series of errors and, rolling 250 people around the country, around the Pacific every week's not a simple task, and there are so many different people involved. So some communication breakdowns sort of between parties have led to a few situations there with the draw. I think it was amplified by the fact that we were playing in a regional venue in Napier, and a game hadn't been there for 4 years, sorry. So it was new for a lot of the Hurricane staff. It was new for the Drua, for a lot of the Drua staff, and it was new for the hotels and the bus companies and all of that sort of thing. So I think we need to make sure that we've really got a particular focus when we're not playing in those regular venues. When the Drua come here to play in Sydney, they know the hotel, they know the Crown Plaza, they know where they're training and things like that. So I think it's just about making sure that when we do have those little anomalies in the draw, that everyone's really communicating well to make sure that those little creases get ironed out.
I think one of the issues, and certainly on social media, but there was some strong commentary there, was from guys like Lottie Takiri, who were saying, Nemani Nadolo, would this have occurred if it wasn't a Fijian side? Was it just pure coincidence that it was a draw team on this situation?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the actual breakdowns in process, I think potentially could have happened to any team, and certainly there was nothing untoward in any of it. It could have happened to any team going to Napier that weekend.
We love what the Drua have done. I think every game they play at the moment is must watch. It doesn't matter whether they're in New Zealand or at home or here in Australia. A couple of cracking more tries on the weekend. I read a report last week saying that there is a proposal in Fiji to potentially bring Super Round to the Pacific, rename it Bula Round. Is this any chance of getting off the ground in the future? I just guess on a broader conversation, where is Super Round at? We heard about the report maybe being lined up alongside the Anzac Bledisloe, potential of an Anzac Bledisloe in Perth next year. But could we see Bula Round in Fiji at some point in time?
I certainly hope so. How good would it be? It would be awesome, I think. It's a really special event day up there in Fiji. And yeah, we are investigating it. I'm certainly keen to bring back Super Round, and we're having a number of discussions with different territories about that. And Fiji is certainly one of them. I think it'd be a great road trip for rugby fans to go up there and see a weekend of Super Rugby, and get a great cultural experience and tie it onto a couple of days on the islands or in Nandi and have a holiday.
Logistically, there would have to be a hell of a lot go into it. Do you think that's possible?
Yeah. I think it is possible, and it would require some infrastructure. So the discussions we're having up there are also about the infrastructure that would need to enable that. So things like lights at in Nandi, Lautoka, to enable night games, because if you're playing 5 games in a weekend, air-conditioned change rooms to enable double headers, those types of things. We would definitely need, but. We're investigating all of those things, because I think it's a really, the Drua are a really integral part of our competition, a real point of difference from us to other competitions, and to get as many people up there to see what it's like would be excellent.
Is it more likely, if that was to occur, that it would be spread across the islands, not just necessarily in Lautoka or Suva the whole time?
We're talking more about it being quite central, and part of that is the hotel infrastructure. You've got to make sure that you've got all of those elements lined up. It's early days in that discussion, so very much exploratory.
I think a lot of people have drawn the comparisons with Australia dropping down to 4 teams this year, being a more competitive collective as a unit. I think we've seen it in the Forces early play, and certainly the Waratahs, Reds and Brumbies are all having their moments, and looks like the Brumbies and Reds really hitting their straps now. Where do you see expansion, that 12th team at the moment? And is the start to this year's competition kind of give you cause to just say, while 11's not an ideal number, clearly from a draw perspective, this is actually pretty good and we don't want to tinker with it right now? Yeah.
I think everyone goes to, we're expanding to 12 teams. That's not our frame of reference at all. We are looking at the future of this competition, where it might go, but that's not driven by we need 12 teams just for a bit of draw simplicity. There's a lot that goes into expansion, and if we were to expand, it would have to deliver a hell of a lot across a number of our sort of strategic pillars. So we are thinking about that. I think it's a way off. And yeah, you're right. We're 5 rounds into a new competition design with 11 teams. And we're learning what does that bring? What does that bring with the buys? How does that help with, it's kind of like this competition is not a long competition, but it's sort of like a middle distance race. So getting that right is really interesting. Clearly it's had advantages in squad depth, as you mentioned. So right now our focus is on getting this right. We are looking at the longer term in where that could go, but it has to deliver for the competition. And we've also we've got Moana Pacifica, and we talked about the Drua, that are still new teams in this competition. And it's no secret commercially our clubs could be stronger. So to expand, you need to make sure you're expanding on solid foundations. And we've probably got a way to go to make sure that we're building those foundations.
It's a fascinating one in terms of the expansion and whether or not you explore that, because back in 2016 when it occurred and went out to Super 18, it clearly didn't work, did it? Because you had sides who weren't well equipped to handle Super Rugby, I don't think, at the time, but also it made it so confusing from a time zone perspective. Is that one of the reasons to go, hang on a moment, we do need to really ensure that if we do expand, we expand at the right time zones so that the eyeballs can still remain on it, because it's much easier to watch a game at 7:30 at night than it is at 3 a.m. in the morning. Yeah,
that's definitely one of the lenses, and you touched upon another. So any change to the competition has to deliver what we call to our competition excellence pillar. So it has to make the competition more interesting. It has to make sure that our quality of game is improving. It then has to drive fan engagement. So how would expansion add to your engagement as an Australian fan, a New Zealand fan, a Fijian fan? And time zones are one of them. Also, who are those other teams? Who's in those other teams? Does that add or subtract to a game versus another team in Super Rugby Pacific? Because we're not getting any, there's no lengthening of this competition right now because of the international calendar. So we're looking at all of these things through a fairly constrained time period. So it has to be incremental in driving incrementality to the competition within a time period, and then commercially, is it adding to our sort of commercial infrastructure, and those are the clubs. So would a team from, let's say, Japan drive more ticket sales for a club than that club playing someone from an existing super club? Because they're the choices that you fundamentally make when assessing expansion.
Commercially, is it possible for Super Rugby to thrive into the future with only 11 sides? Do you think it actually has to go, not just consolidate now, but can it survive on 11, or do you think it will have to go to more in the future?
I think there's a lot of headroom for our competition as it stands right now. We talked a bit about TV cycles and things like that. I think with more focus on this competition, with putting the fan in the room and driving commercial outcomes, there's a hell of a lot of upside for this competition as it is right now.
Matty Ward on Twitter. I hope that answered your question, mate. A few more, Jack, if I may, from socials. One from Hugh Cropley. Looks like there was 587,000 who watched the Tasvi Reds on the main Channel 9 on Saturday night. How does Super Rugby get more primetime games like that? Now, it's actually almost opened up a window this year with no AFL nor NRL on free-to-air channel on a Saturday. So the window is there. How do you convince the broadcasters to give you a chance?
By delivering great numbers like that. It's pure and simple. We deliver an audience. We will get on bigger channels and drive better returns. So, it's about us being as good as we can be and making sure that those results for the broadcasters, for sponsors, or for whoever else in our ecosystem, that we'll get better returns if we're doing that.
Next one from BG, at Faster Stronger 6, must be an Olympics fan. Can we start receiving any explanations during the week from, say, the head of referees for some of these foul play cards, e.g. Punavai's tackle on the weekend? I certainly wrote a piece about Hunter Paisami's tackle the other week, which the Reds, ultimately accepted that decision around. I think this is a broader conversation for rugby fans, but can we see any type of explanation coming in Super Rugby?
Yeah. So interestingly, before we came in here to record, we have a weekly meeting, which is between our media guys and our match official managers and the tournament administration to talk about that, to talk exactly about, have we got inbound inquiry about decisions that we need to go public and clarify on. And I guess then the question is the decision to then go public on it, is it a material enough decision to go public on? So you've seen other codes come out and maybe have a standing position on a Monday.
Graham Mesley does it with the NRL. Yep.
Well, I think they've canned it now as literally or they're going to stop doing it. My point of view is we don't want to be talking about match officials, right? And so a standing position on a Monday to come out and explain good or bad decisions means that we are having to fill that slot, if you like. So we will come out if we think there is a material enough decision that needs clarity. But behind the scenes, there's a really thorough process of a review at a match official level with the coaches, with both coaches from the weekend, that are ensuring that those discussions are happening between teams, and that then are being calibrated between the match officials. So, I think we're not afraid to come out publicly, but if you think about how many decisions there are in a weekend, and how many of those are right and wrong and contentious, what we don't want to be doing on a Monday is filling up, yes, it might be a material decision for a fan at that moment, but overall, at a competition level, how material are they?
Is there a bit of a human welfare kind of situation there as well, that you want to protect the officials a little bit?
I want the match officials to have confidence going into weekend, but no, I think for us it's more about making sure that we've got time to do that process, and then what we don't want to do is just have to come out and fill a space, if you know what I mean.
Sure.
But I think the thing I would say is that you can clearly see we have given the MOs a mandate to move the game on and to go fast. The TMO is not in the game as much as they are in other leagues, which means the refs don't have all the tools at their disposal like they do for test matches.
I think the tight 5 forwards is the only one struggling with that. Everyone else is enjoying it. Tom McCarthy, what are the chances we could ever have a consistent salary cap across all super teams?
Yeah. I want as much jeopardy in the competition as fans do, and clearly a salary cap is one avenue to play with that. I think it's a way off.
And is this because of the Rugby Australia New Zealand? They've got players, national contracted players, which change then how much a side has from a salary cap perspective.
Yeah, and as RA moved to a more centralised model, bringing 2 centralised models that are led by national team contracts to a completely separate model is it's a really complex, difficult thing to do. But how we drive jeopardy into the competition, and how important is it? I think we're seeing how important it is over those first 5 rounds. So there are some other levers that we can look at before we get to that.
And you don't want to become a Leinster of the United Rugby Championship, right? Where everyone just expects Leinster's going to fill up the Irish team, and then the rest of them get scrapped.
Ironically, which there are some real conversations going on around that right now in Ireland.
Yeah, I think the other thing as well, the other domestic codes are the pinnacle of the game, and so you have a closed player pool. An AFL player is not going anywhere else, so they can only move around clubs. So it is difficult to take some of those kind of principles that exist in a closed player model, NFL, NBA, AFL, NRL, and apply them to an international an international code like rugby as well.
One more from Jock Cudmore. Are there any conversations happening around open border policies between Super Rugby clubs and obviously Australia and New Zealand? Do you foresee a time where we will see a Bowden Barrett come across and play for the Waratahs and more of James O'Connor finishing off his career in the Crusaders this year?
Yeah, and the question there is, can they do that and still be eligible for their national teams, right? I mean, anyone's free to move across the border, as we've seen, James O'Connor do. And even Artie moving to Moana Pacifica is the same kind of thing.
Do you feel that New Zealand rugby probably in particular would consider that at some point?
I think so. And I think Artie's a great step in the right direction to show that it can work. Where they have granted Artie to move to not one of the traditional New Zealand franchises and still be eligible for national team.
Christy, just one more from me before we wrap up, maybe a final thought from you. The marketing, you and I were talking before we came on today, there still seems to be a bit of separation between how Sky do it and how Stan Sport do it. And obviously they've got different objectives and different styles and whatever. Is there any kind of pursuit or wishes on your end to kind of get some commonality there? And just, I think we've all seen this season, there's a lot more clips going out on the Super Rugby social accounts, a lot more kind of, water cooler moments being shared out there. But is that a kind of bit of a bone of contention for you, that trying to bring those two bodies together for something more consistent across the board?
I think it's come a long way. I think even if you and both broadcasters are working pretty tightly together. You'll see talent now come across and do some segments in some of the shoulder content. We're running a consistent graphics package throughout all broadcasters now. And some of those intersects for fans, like I know I'm going to get a coach's interview post half time and those types of things. We're working hard on those things. So I think that's moving in the right direction. We're continuing to try to bring them together. So when we meet and do commentators briefings or pre-season briefings, we're trying to do that as a collective. So we're having one conversation and bringing everyone together on that. And I'd add FBC, our Fijian broadcast partner, to that conversation as well.
I know we can't keep you here all day. Like Super Rugby, if we're picturing what it might look like in 3, 4, 5 years' time, given that the broadcast deals are going to be coming out soon, we expect it to be 11 perhaps until 2030 at the very earliest. Would that be right?
Yeah, I think, right now our strategy is sort of 3-year strategy. So I think for that period, I think you can probably expect to see the same. Some things that, so we want to continue to get better at how we're allowing fans to engage with it. So, gamification, bringing fans into stadiums, that's a real focus for us. Some other things that are probably further out that are interesting, I think, we know our clubs want to show that they are the best clubs in the world. So potentially some more best of best first best club stuff might come into the schedule, which I think is really interesting to show.
What might that look like?
That could be, for example, the winner of our comp playing the winner of the URC or something like that. Club World Cup.
Is that any chance for 2028? That kind of last report, that Club World Cup. Working on it.
I can't say a lot, but I think our clubs have a real desire to show that they are the best in the world. And that's an avenue for it, and we're looking at those things closely.
Nick Fitz certainly helping to drive that on a rival show last week. Sorry, one last one. Apparently in the URC there is a graphic that comes up with decisions when they're handed down to help show the offence, the mitigation, and the games missed to help with fan engagement. I haven't seen this one. This is from Stevie Lenthal on X. Are you familiar with that graphic? Is that something that we could potentially see in Super Rugby?
Yeah, I think the broadcasters now trying to put it up as a little ticker under the score, and we're actually brought it into stadiums for some of our clubs. So yeah, we're really focused on that. We did a big piece of fan research into the how fans are engaging with the game, which helped shape some of our decisions on laws and referees' focus. But the other part that we've really got to get better at is how do we make it simpler for fans to engage with what is a complex game? So those types of things are really key. We're also trying to make sure that when a TMO comes in on a decision, the people in stadium can get the referee's mic to make sure they're really clear as to what's happened and what the decision is. So, yeah, continue focus on trying to simplify the game and move it forward through laws and match officials. But that kind of translation to fan engagement and understanding is an absolute focus for us.
Well, as Christy said, Jack, I think we could go all day, mate. I know you're a busy man. Thanks so much for coming into the Schmidt House. Hopefully you'll be back again before the season's out.
Anytime. Thanks for having me. Cheers.